Okay, 1 second. Getting live stream started. 1 second. Live stream. Okay, you're ready to go.
All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Casey Milberg. I'm the policy director in Mayor Tashara Jones's office. The time is 10:12 a.m. Thank you for anyone watching for bearing with us. We had a little bit of technical difficulties we were working through, but we are very pleased to call to order the first ever meeting of the Long-Term Revenue Advisory Council, organized on behalf of the City of St. Louis, pursuant to Executive Order 80. This is, of course, a public meeting, so we are delighted to welcome any members of the public who have joined us virtually through the live streaming of this meeting through STL TV and the City of St. Louis YouTube channel. And a special thanks to our STL TV staff for facilitating this meeting and making that possible. Our first agenda item is the swearing in of the members of the Long-Term Revenue Advisory Council by City Registrar Amber Boykin Sims. Registrar Sims, I will turn things over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I am Amber Boykin Sims, the City Registrar. You're about to take your official oath of office. What will happen is you will raise your right hand. I will say aye. You will say aye. You will state your name, and then you'll repeat after me. Please raise your right hand. I state your name.
Fletcher.
Now repeat after me. Having been appointed by
Having been appointed by
Mayor Tashara O. Jones,
Mayor Tashara O. Jones,
approved by
approved by
the City of St. Louis,
the City of
City
St.
of St.
Louis,
Louis,
to the office of
to the office of
Long-Term Revenue Advisory Council
Long-Term Revenue
Revenue
Advisory
Advisory
Council
of the City of St. Louis,
of the City of St. Louis.
do solemnly swear or affirm, you may state either word,
do solemnly affirm
that I have all the qualifications
That I have all
all the
the
qualifications
and am
and
not subject to
not subject to
any of the disqualifications
any of the disqualifications
qualifications
named in the charter
named in
in the charter
for the office
for
the office
or employment
or for employment
I'm about to assume,
I'm about to assume
that I will support
that I will support
the Constitution
the Constitution
of the United States
of the United States
and of this state,
and of this
this
state,
and the charter and ordinances
and
the charter and ordinances
of the city,
of the
the
city,
city,
that I will be
that I will be
influenced only by
influenced only by
the consideration of fitness
the consideration
consideration of business
in the appointment,
and the appointment,
promotion,
promotion,
demotion,
demotion,
suspension,
suspension,
or discharge
or
discharge
of officers
of
officers
officers
or employees,
or
or employees.
that I will not
that I will
not
not
expend nor authorize
expend or
Or
authorize
authorize
the expenditure of money
the
the
expenditure
expenditure of money
otherwise than
than
for the adequate consideration
adequate consideration
and
consideration
efficient service
and efficient service
to the city,
to the city,
and will faithfully discharge
and will faithfully discharge
the duties of my office
the duties of
my
my
office
office
or employment.
or employment.
employment.
You may lower your hands. On behalf of myself and the Honorable Mayor Tashara Jones, we want to thank you for your service to the City of St. Louis. We want to thank you and once again, welcome to the City of St. Louis Long-Term Revenue Advisory Council Board. This completes your swearing in ceremony and oath of office, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Register Sims. And now we will turn to the next order of business, which is the roll call of members. We will start with voting members, then we'll proceed to our two ex officio members. When you hear your name, please respond with either here or present. We'll go ahead in alphabetical order by last name. Lorenzo Boyd,
Here.
Ryan Coleman,
Here.
Nancy Cross,
Here.
Jason Fletcher,
Here.
Treasurer Adam Lane,
Present.
Sam Murphy,
Here.
Linda Wynn,
Here.
Budget Director Payne,
Here.
Danielle Scott Parker,
Here.
Mark Stoff,
Present.
Tracy Verner.
Present.
Wonderful. And those are our voting members. We'll now proceed to our ex officio members. Assessor Michael Dauphin. Rebecca Perry Glickstein. Rebecca Perry Glickstein.
Here,
Is it Glickstein or Glickstein?
it's Glickstein. Thank you.
Glickstein. Wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you. And if there's anyone's names I did not pronounce correctly, please feel free to correct me. That's very welcomed and encouraged. All right, we will now proceed to the next order of business on the agenda, which is the discussion and approval of the rules of order and procedure. We circulated to the members of this group a 2-page draft rules of order and procedure for review and discussion. These will be posted online for those watching virtually. And I will now entertain a motion to adopt these proposed rules of order and procedure. And after that motion is made and seconded, we will then open the floor for discussion on the rules of order and procedure before taking the actual vote to approve it. So is there a motion to adopt the proposed rules of order and procedure?
So moved.
Second.
Wonderful. And then I had, and I'm sorry, who made the initial motion? And Nancy Cross made the second.
I think me and Sam sort of tied on that one.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Ryan. All right, having been made and moved and seconded, a motion to adopt the proposed rules of order and procedure is now on the table. If helpful, I'm happy to do a quick overview of the contents of it. And if there's any discussion topics, questions, or comments folks would like to offer during any section, please feel free to use a little hand raising icon on your computer. So section 1 talks about the officers of this group and agendas. The officers are going to be a chair and vice chair, which this council will select as part of the next order of business on the agenda. The duties of the chair and vice chair are to coordinate with council staff, that is me, and the council members in preparing agendas and presentations for this group. And then, of course, the chair presides over the meetings of the council and will speak for the council when it's not meeting, and in the chair's absence, the vice chair fulfills those duties. Are there any comments or questions about that?
No comments.
Great. Section 2 is quorum. A quorum of this council is 6 of the 11 voting council members, so it's a simple majority standard. Okay. The next section is about meetings. The regular meetings of the council can be held in physical locations or virtually as designated by this group. The chair, of course, presides, and in the absence of the chair will be the vice chair, or if both are not able to attend, other member of the council can be appointed to preside in their absence. The members shall conduct an orderly proceeding and are guided by Robert's Rules of Order. Special meetings can be requested by at least 6 members to the chair and to be held either in a physical location or virtually. Let's see, they can be requested and voted upon either during regular meetings like this or via email. They're otherwise governed by the same rules and processes as regular meetings are. And then because this is a public governmental body, notice of all meetings will comply with the requirements of Missouri Sunshine Law. Meetings are open to the public, consistent with Missouri Sunshine Law, and also consistent with the city's transparency and government law. That's Ordinance 69707. And meetings will be video recorded as they are being today. Any comments or questions about that?
Yeah, Casey, I have a question.
Yeah.
So I see the meetings, it's the intent for the meetings to be recorded and they're being recorded. And I see that documents and minutes will be posted to the website. Is the intent, or does it need to be spelled out here, that the videos will be posted?
I believe that's the default for STL TV. STL TV, can you confirm that quickly if you're able to, that once they're recorded that they are posted and uploaded to the city's YouTube page?
Yes, that depends on what's requested when the meeting is set up, but most meetings do get posted unless they're
Okay.
selected to not for some reason, but that's usually internal meetings that are not posted. So
Got
yeah,
it.
these are
Okay.
posted.
Wonderful. Thank you. Great. Thank
Great,
you.
thank
Okay. The next section, council records, minutes will of course be recorded by staff, i.e. me, for the council, and then of course posted on the city's website. They'll reflect what was discussed and actions taken during meetings like votes and motions, any written submissions to the council, such as if somebody provides informational material to consider as part of discussions. That'll be included as part of the permanent record to the council, and that will also be posted to the council website, as will any documents prepared or presented by council members or staff that pertain to the work of this website. So for example, the presentation that Budget Director Payne is presenting today, we'll make sure that's available on the city's website as well. And then again, reiterating that the council records like these are open to the public pursuant to the Sunshine Law and the city's transparency and government laws. Any comments about that? Okay, staff, pretty straightforward. The mayor will designate staff to assist the council, and that's me, policy director for the mayor's office. So for helping coordinate meetings, presentations, taking notes, assisting you all in recruiting speakers, and then preparing, the written report of recommendations, and anything that really falls into that category. I will be assisting you all with facilitating that. The next section is about voting, pretty straightforward. Any roll call votes are recorded by staff by reading aloud the names with each member voting yes, no, or present. And then we'll include that in the minutes of each meeting. And then roll call votes will be required for in certain circumstances, any item of business if that's requested. And then of course, adopting the proposed recommendations for the council's report. Okay, on to the next section, which discusses council recommendations and report. This is governed, of course, by the executive order creating this council. So within 6 months of this meeting today, the council is charged with producing a report to the mayor that summarizes the issues that this group has studied and information gathered during that process, and also provides recommendations for how the city can diversify, stabilize, grow, and sustain its revenue for the long term. Also that those strategies will not disproportionately burden residents with lower incomes. And then the next section talks about amending these. These rules of order can, of course, be amended or repealed at any regular or special meeting that takes an affirmative vote of the majority of council members to do that. Okay, and then the final section is conclusion of work, which is also governed by the executive order. Once the report of recommendations is issued to the mayor, then this group dissolves. Okay, any other questions, comments, or discussion on this? Seeing none, is there a motion to, let's put the motion to the vote. The motion's on the floor. All in favor of adopting the proposed rules of order and procedure, please signify by saying aye.
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 Okay. All opposed, please say no. Okay, any abstentions in voting? Okay, the motion carries and with 11 aye votes. So we have approved the rules of order and procedure, and we will now move on to the next item of business, which is nomination, discussion, and election of a chair and a vice chair. So we will now entertain nominations for the position of the chair of this council. Is there anybody who would like to nominate someone or nominate themselves for the position?
I would like to nominate Lorenzo Boyd.
I'll second that nomination.
Great. There's a motion that has been made and seconded to nominate Lorenzo Boyd to be the chair of the Long-Term Revenue Advisory Council. Is there anyone else? Okay, seeing none. Let's see, Mr. Boyd, is there anything that you would like to offer in terms of why your thoughts on this? Would you want to be the chair? Would you accept this nomination? Anything you'd like to say in response to being thrown out there?
Thanks, Casey. Good morning, everyone. It is my extreme honor to actually be involved in this council, and I do accept the role of being chair of the Long-Term Revenue Advisory Council, and I look forward to this appointment.
Great. All right. Well, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, please signify by saying no. Any abstentions? Okay, all right. Well, congratulations, Mr. Boyd. You now have one more responsibility on your plate. Welcome. And we will now go ahead and entertain nominations for the position of Vice Chair of the Charter Commission. So would anybody like to nominate themselves or someone else for that position?
I'd like to nominate Danielle Scott Parker.
All right. Is there a second?
I'll second that. I have a point of clarification. This is the Long-Term Advisory Council, not the Charter Commission.
I'm so sorry. Thank you.
That's okay. I just want
spent
to
a
make
year.
sure.
Thank you. I spent a year of my life serving on that, so it's a little bit hard to work out of my brain. Thank you very much, Nancy. So yes, let's go ahead and restate that the nominee for Vice Chair of the Long-Term Revenue Advisory Council. And then, yeah, so I'm going to open that up again.
I would like to nominate myself. I'm Linda Nguyen. I'm with the Community Builders Network. I would like to represent on the community side of the council.
I accept that nomination.
Got it. Okay.
Casey,
Okay.
since you made the correction, do I have to renew my nomination or no?
Yes, procedurally, yes. Mhm.
Okay, so I would like to renew my nomination as well.
Second.
Got it. And Paul seconds. And then, okay, well, we'll go ahead and allow for a little bit of discussion. So we'll start with Danielle Scott. And let's see, we'll start with Danielle and then we'll go ahead and open up to Linda. So if you both would like to just talk a little bit about why you'd be interested in serving this role. So we'll start with Danielle and then Linda, we'll go ahead and pivot it over to you.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Danielle Scott Parker. I'm a director at PFM. I'd be happy to support in this role. The only hesitation is I am not based in St. Louis. I'm based in New Orleans, Louisiana. And so if that poses a problem for serving in this position, either for coordination purposes or needing to be in person at any given time, that would be the only thing I would want to put up front. But happy to serve in the position. And my expertise on budget and finance may be useful, which is part of why I'm joining in this committee in the first place.
Great. Thank you for that. And then Linda, we'll go ahead and kick it over to you.
Yeah, and good morning. I'm Linda Nguyen. I'm the executive director of the Community Builders Network. We're a convener and capacity builder for the community development sector here in St. Louis. So we serve pretty much the whole region. I have over 20 years of experience in community development-based organizations. I would love to be a representative, just making sure that, as we are looking at revenue and the impact on our city, that we're not, harming those who have been largely divested, but also looking at the future growth of our organization, of our city as well.
Great. And now we'll open up for any broader group discussion on either nominee.
Yeah, I'll say something real quick. I seconded the nomination of Danielle Scott Parker, just because I'm familiar with the work that her section at PFM does. They specialize in reviewing revenue streams for municipalities. And that's why I think that she would be a good choice for chair. Vice chair, sorry.
Okay.
I'm glad to hear that a little bit of background. Danielle, I apologize. I'm not familiar with PFM and what that means.
Sure, and I'm happy to give more background on the firm as well. PFM has been the financial advisor for the city for many years, and my colleague on the financial advisory side, Rebecca Perry Glitzen, who was just on the call, has been the main point of contact with the city for a number of years. The group consulting piece, where I sit, focuses on issues of management and budget. So working with the city and municipalities across the country on things like operations, budget, policy, long-range financial planning, and evaluating a number of different financial issues. Our practice on the consulting side has also worked with the city over the years on a number of different topics and issues. So there is definitely a subject matter expertise that I'm excited to bring to this group.
Thank you for that.
Any other questions for either nominee?
So,
Okay.
I would say, I think, my only concern is, I think Danielle and Linda will both be assets to the group. The one, piece I think is potentially problematic. It's not a big problem, but that Danielle, you work with the city a lot, but you actually aren't in the city. And, since Lorenzo comes from a financial background as well, a financial advisory background, maybe if we had someone from the community, that evens the group out a little bit, and your expertise would still really be involved in the issue, but most of us are not from community groups in our current position. So that would be my thinking, in that maybe we try to even it out a little bit so that it's not all city employees and financial firms mostly that are on this call. So I'm sure both of you are highly qualified, but that's one thing I would lean to saying about trying to figure out what makes the most sense for our public perception of what we're trying to do here, because the long-term revenue streams will impact most of the people that are in the community, and you both have a sense of that. One coming from a firm perspective and one coming from a community perspective. And I'm open to both of you correcting me if I'm wrong, because I might be making some jumps on assumptions. I work with BFM through the comptroller's office on occasion on different projects, but that's my only concern about what the group would look like. So.
Okay, any other thoughts? Okay, so since we have multiple candidates, the way voting proceeds is we'll do the roll call of voting members, again, alphabetical order. When your name is called, you indicate the candidate for which you wish to cast your vote, or if you wish to abstain, you will say abstain. So is everybody clear on that? You will either say the candidate that you wish to cast your vote for, or you will abstain. Okay. All right, well, we will go ahead and proceed in alphabetical order. Chair Boyd.
Abstain.
Abstain, okay. Ryan Coleman.
Ms. Scott Parker.
Okay. Nancy Cross.
Linda.
Jason Fletcher. Jason?
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. Miss Scott Parker.
Got it. Treasurer Lane.
Miss Scott Parker.
Okay. Sam Murphy.
Ms. Scott Parker.
All right. Linda Nguyen. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Nguyen?
Hmm?
Wonderful.
That's
Linda
awesome.
Nguyen. Great.
Linda.
Linda. Okay. Okay. Paul Payne.
Danielle Scott Parker.
Okay. Danielle Scott Parker. I'll vote for Linda. All right. Mark Stoff.
I'll vote for Linda.
All right. And Tracy Berner.
I'll vote for Linda.
Linda. Okay. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 votes for Danielle Scott Parker. And then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 votes for Linda. So what this means is, yeah, so since we have a tie, we will go back and re-proceed with the vote until there's a candidate who gets a majority of votes. So
I think there was an abstention, though. Can we revisit that abstention, or do we need to do the whole vote again?
it would need to be procedurally
gotcha.
done as a whole vote because the choice of that member was to do an abstention.
Gotcha.
So yes, so prior to reopening that vote, want to open up for any additional comments or questions anybody would like to make.
I do have one. I observed Miss Danielle Scott Parker voting for Miss Linda, and that swayed me in that direction. I don't know if Danielle, were you moved by Nancy's observation, just in regards to the perception of the community and representation here? Was that why you voted that way?
Partially, I think I very much see myself as being an asset to the committee and to the council, and will be able to provide that same level of support and insight and guidance, whether I'm the vice chair or just a member of the council. And again, do think about and somewhat cautious of the fact that because I'm not based in St. Louis and not a resident, that want to make sure that all of the recommendations and the work that comes out of this council are viewed and accepted and sort of, taken into the full account and really loved and taken on by the community in that way. So that is my main hesitation. The other hat I play at PFM is I co-lead our Center for Budget Equity and Innovation, and I do think there's a power in community voice, particularly in these spaces. So I'm happy, like I said, if the council would like me to be the vice chair, and if that's the vote, I will absolutely take on the position with not a problem, but will also support very much so Miss Linda taking the role as the community voice and someone who's local.
Yeah, very, very insightful of you. Yeah.
Any other comments?
Ms. Scott Parker, would you prefer that I withdraw the nomination, or I don't know if we'll get to another 5-5, but and I'm not trying to influence the vote in any way, but if you feel that way, we could execute a little bit more efficiently if that's the case.
And Casey, if it makes sense, I'll withdraw my abstention. The only reason I abstained from the original vote was because I have worked extensively with PFM in the past. Some of my work as an investment banker with PFM and the city of St. Louis. So I really wanted to abstain from that vote. Didn't expect a tie, so to speak. I've spoke with Danielle Scott Parker in the past, and I have a personal relationship with her colleague, Rebecca Perry Glickstein. So I originally abstained, didn't actually think that there would be a tie. But if we need a new roll call, and based on the recent discussion with Danielle Scott Parker, I'll vote for Linda.
Well, I think procedurally what we'll do is, so we have a few different options before us right now. I know Treasurer Lane posed the question to you, Ms. Scott Parker, about if you still want to proceed with your nomination. And if you do, that is completely fine. And we will go through the same process, again, and do the roll call vote that way. So did want to give you a chance to respond to that, and there's no wrong answer. And then once you have a chance to respond to that, we will go ahead and proceed through the roll call vote. Just procedurally, that is what we do have to do.
Sure. If you wouldn't mind, I'd love to pull my nomination. I think that makes the most sense. Like I said, I would want to make sure that the community voice and someone local sits in that vice chair role.
Sure.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
So, Casey, I will withdraw my nomination. I don't remember who the second was, but yeah. Oh, well, I guess you have it written down.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. That sounds good. Paul was the second. So we'll go ahead and withdraw that. Thank you all for the wonderful discussion.
Does Paul have to withdraw a second as well?
Yes. Thank you for flagging that.
Yes, he does.
Yeah. Paul, would you withdraw your second?
Respectfully, I think I seconded it, and I'm willing to withdraw it.
Got it. Okay. I apologize. I have Paul down for that one. Okay.
No worries.
Got it. Okay. So the motion and second both having been withdrawn, the nominee on the table for vice chair is Linda Nguyen, and we will proceed through the roll call voting members. Please vote aye or abstain or no. Lorenzo Boyd,
Aye.
Ryan Coleman.
Aye.
Nancy Cross,
Aye.
Jason Fletcher,
Aye.
Treasurer Lane,
Aye.
Sam Murphy,
Aye.
Linda Nguyen,
Aye.
Paul Payne,
Aye.
Danielle Scott Parker,
Aye.
Mark Stoff.
Aye.
All right, and Tracy Berner.
Hi.
All right. Okay, with there being 11 aye votes, we now have vice chair as Linda Nguyen. All right. That was exciting. We are now moving on to the next agenda item, which is going to be the discussion of goals and pertinent timelines. This is something we have as the chair now also putting their hat on and participating in. I will start things off by just doing a quick reminder of what is required under Executive Order 80, which sets forth the broad goals for this council as recommending strategies for long-term diversification, stability, growth, and sustainability of the revenue of the city of St. Louis, and supporting the development and growth in the city, and making sure that any strategies this group identifies and develops are not disproportionately burdening residents with lower incomes. And that within 6 months, this group is charged with producing to the mayor of the city a report that summarizes the issues that this group has studied, information gathered, and of course makes recommendations for how the city can look to achieve all those outcomes with its revenue for the long term. So Chair Boyd, I will kick conversation and facilitation of any discussion about any other goals that other members of this council may have over to you for facilitation.
Thanks, Casey. Thanks everyone for joining the call this morning. I don't believe I gave a little bit of my background earlier in terms of my nomination as the chair, but I have worked for Stifel for the past 16 years, and prior to that, another firm, AG Evers, as an investment banker in the space of working with local governments in terms of municipal bond underwritings for the past 32 years. And prior to that, served in the U.S. military for 4 years and decided to do something a little bit safer, which I think this is a lot safer than providing support in Desert Storm and things of that nature. So I'm glad to do this role. I think in terms of, as you mentioned, Casey, in terms of Executive Order number 80, the mayor wanted to put forth a long-term revenue advisory council to look at, options to actually increase revenue in the city of St. Louis, and being a person that grew up in the city of St. Louis and being actually working in the city of St. Louis, I want to make sure that our city has a long-term sustainability, and then also able to diversify its revenue stream so that it can grow in the future. So I think in terms of you putting forth the timeline, which I was glad that you put together that timeline in terms of what we expect as a group and what we expect to discuss. I think that's very important for us as we kind of move through this challenging council initiative to kind of look at and get more ways to look at the city, its revenue streams, its economy, how the workforce is developed, how businesses are attracted to the city, so that we can see the city of St. Louis actually thrive in the future.
Great. In addition to that, are there any other goals that folks would like to share that they are bringing to this group's work? Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that overview, Chair Boyd. We will now proceed to the next agenda item, which is discussion of suggestions and recommendations for monthly briefing topics. There was a draft shared with you all about different topics that this group could focus on for briefings on a monthly basis. And so the purpose of this is to just propose this as a potential schedule of topics, get your feedback on it, identify if there are any topics that seem to be missing. And so I'll do a quick overview of what that looks like. So of course, this month's topic will be city revenue. Our budget director, Paul Payne, will be presenting a nice overview to give us a good foundation for this work shortly. For October 24, 2024, the suggested topic is an overview of the city's economy, focusing on areas of economic strength, growth, and opportunity for the city. Potential topic for November of 2024 is looking at what is driving business, industry, and workforce development, retention, recruitment, and growth within the city. Potential topic for December of 2024 is looking at revenue-related limitations and state laws and other areas of fiscal limitation or risk for the city. Potential topic for January 2025 is current efforts and potential opportunities to modernize critical sectors for the city, like land use, housing, development processes, and more. Potential topic for February of 2025 is presenting preliminary insights gained from this council's work so far to the community to facilitate feedback and discussion and input. And then of March of 2025 would be discussion, review, and approval of the report of recommendations. So I wanted to open this potential list of topics up for discussion, conversation. Again, if there's anything that seems like it's missing or anything on those lines, this is the time to bring this forward.
Casey, just looking at the agenda, one of the things that I possibly would like to add, I'm not sure of everyone's background on this call, but I think perhaps just having an open discussion of the various offices of the city as a broad overview in terms of the mayor's office, what their role is, and the comptroller's office and the president of the board of aldermen. I'm not sure in terms of if everyone kind of understands what really city government and how decisions are made first and foremost. So I think a broad overview of that, perhaps not on this call, but as we come back to the city economy in October 2024, just because I'm just unaware, I know how it works. I've worked with you guys for over 30 years, but not sure if everyone's familiar with how general government with the city of St. Louis works, because it differs in each major metropolitan city.
Sure. Yeah, I think that would be very easy to facilitate, and it sounds like that could be a topic to share with folks perhaps sooner rather than later, just to give folks a basic understanding. Would folks be in agreement with that?
Absolutely.
Okay, so perhaps looking at that potentially being another topic of focus for the October meeting.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Easy enough.
Casey, a few ideas here. One, I think it might be useful early in our work to get an overview of demographic trends in the city as well. That would kind of go hand in hand with a discussion of economic drivers, but just understanding population shifts, age shifts, things like that within the city. A second would be in the discussion of the city's economy, I see there that there's a note on economic, areas of economic strength and growth. I think probably broadening that to be a pretty clear-eyed assessment of strengths and weaknesses. Sure. And I wonder if that's something where we could turn to an expert, such as someone with like the Federal Reserve, come in and just give us a really good kind of baseline and background on the economy in the city and the region. And then a third and final thought for the topic in December, where it says right now, revenue-related limitations in state law. I think probably also looking at proposals to change state law and what some of those implications could be. Things as drastic as the proposals this last year on the earnings tax, but also things with proposals to change sales tax laws and for instance not allowing localities to tax groceries, things like that are being debated and discussed in Jefferson City would be very useful.
Great. So sort of a landscape of what have been those topics recently and what could we anticipate? Sure. Okay. Yep. Any other thoughts anybody wants to bring forward on this?
And Casey, I'm not sure if there's an opportunity, just looking at the timeline and this, we may not have, time to address this, but as we kind of look at, trends in terms of identifying opportunities for revenue growth in the city, is it possible to bring in someone, and maybe PFM has this focus, I know they do a lot of work around the country, just look at what other cities are doing in terms of diversifying their revenue streams and things of that nature. Maybe we can't do some of those things because of our limitations in the state of Missouri, but just kind of looking for key ideas that other cities have taken on to perhaps increase their revenue and attract workforces or companies to the city. So I think if we could have someone kind of have a brief discussion along those lines, I think that would be great, because maybe there's some ideas there. And, you know, a lot of times people piggyback on other opportunities and other things that other cities are doing. I think that's an opportunity for us to kind of look at those ideas.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's it's a good suggestion. And as a reminder too, this group has the ability to also designate special meetings. If, 1 month seems like it's getting loaded up a little bit, that's fine. There can always be a separate meeting, to accommodate if there's, a particular speaker topic that maybe doesn't fit within the time frame, of, one meeting or another. So re-upping that, but yeah, certainly we'll add that to the list of topics. And let's see who had their hand up. Danielle, I think I saw yours first, and then Nancy will go to you.
Sure. I was just gonna offer that I'm happy to support in providing at least some thoughts around best practices and best and promising practices, both across the state and what we're seeing across the country on some of the different revenue options. Was also thinking, as we think about revenues coming in, if there are any, and this may be from the city's economic development folks, and if there are any major either newer projects that are in progress that can be discussed, whether it's new events, major businesses that are coming in that also would have an impact on the existing revenue stream coming in, either from sales tax or other taxing streams. That would be helpful to know for this committee.
Sure thing. All right, and then Nancy will go over to you.
So I was gonna echo what Lorenzo was saying, and let people know, if they don't, that the city belongs to some national organizations that are looking at cities across the country that are like our size and population growth too, to figure out where you go in the next 5 or 10 years. And many staff people have been involved, so that's a resource that's available to us. Also, it's the U.S. Conference of Mayors, it's the African American Mayors Association, and it's the NILC, which I forget what that stands for, but all of those groups in Bloomberg have been very helpful in providing us with data, along with what Danielle's saying. And then on top of what Danielle is saying, I would add that when you have all these projects coming in, we also need to look at their tax-based initiative. They may not all be taxes coming into the city automatically. It may be a period of time as to when we actually see revenue from that, and how that's all working as well with TIF money and different types of money and tax breaks to bring companies in, how that's going to impact us going down the line as well.
Great, absolutely. Thank you for that. Let's see, I think I saw Ryan's hand up next, and then Treasurer Lane will go over to you. Ryan?
Sure, thanks. Also on Lorenzo's comment, I just thought timing wise that if we're going to look at what other cities and states might be doing in this regard, that for it to follow our session where we learn what our limitations are might be good. So we aren't seeing lots of great ideas from around the country and thinking that we might be able to do them. And I'm sure whoever prepared those would be mindful of that. But anyway, just timing wise, I think it'd be best to have that after that discussion. Thank you.
Great, thank you for sharing that. And that would be, more after, so that revenue limitations, risks, whatnot, that's tentatively planned for December. So that would mean looking more January, start of the year conversation for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was my suggestion.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, Treasurer Lane.
Thanks, Casey. I just want to say, I know since one of the goals or a major goal of this group is to make sure that, yes, we increase revenue, look for opportunities to increase revenue, but don't adversely impact already marginalized communities. So my recommendation would be for us to either start developing or think about developing some sort of decision matrix or scorecard for suggestions and things that we do. I don't want to get into a place where, it's like, oh, that sounds like a decision, makes money. And then it's like, but there's this, and then there's that. And then it's just like, is it a good decision or is it not a good decision? But if we're able to somewhat objectively look at where all the, what are the equity indicators, what are the effects, the economic effects, but also, what are the potential revenue generators? We can be able to look at all of these factors in a way that allows us to make the best decision possible. And best decisions possible, I'll say.
Treasurer Lane, are you volunteering yourself to help take on that task?
I've made scorecards before, so yeah, I love a rubric.
I
So
can also.
I've already started listing them out. So I'm sorry.
I said I'm also happy to work with Treasurer Lane on thinking about the equity impacts, particularly on revenue, making sure that there's not anything that's overly regressive or that's going to have above and beyond negative impacts on marginal communities or communities that you already are overburdened from a tax burden perspective. And that's another analysis that may be helpful as evaluating as we're thinking about revenues, what the tax burden, the city may already have this, but the tax burden of the typical resident is, so that we can sort of be mindful of that at the front end.
That's great. I'll connect with you both and get a separate email chain going. We can for sure start working on facilitating that. And if there's anyone else in this group who wants to join in that effort, either feel free to say so now or send me an email and we'll make sure that you're part of that conversation too.
I would love to be part of that process.
Myself as well, Casey.
Great.
And myself as well.
Great. Okay. All right. Any other thoughts? And of course, this can evolve and become subject to change as conversations happen, as additional thoughts occur to this group. So just know that this is not the final, say on this, but this is a really good feedback session on this. And what I will do is I will go ahead and update this draft and then share an updated version of that with you all that reflects the conversations today. And we can use that as the new model going forward. And for those watching at home, this will also be posted online as well.
Thanks, Casey.
Yeah. All right. Well, we are then on to the next item of business, which is a presentation by our City Budget Director, Paul Payne, on city revenues. So Director Payne, thank you so much for being willing to help kick us off and give us a good foundational understanding of city revenue. And I will turn things over to you.
Okay, great. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Casey. I have put together a presentation I'm going to share here, and let me see. Find it on my screen. Hopefully you can see, so everyone can see that. Great.
Yes.
Great. Yeah, and it's interesting to listen to this. Sometimes you're so close to these revenue issues that you can't see the forest for the trees. And so what I tried to take a step back and provide some historical perspective to many of the things that we've been discussing so far. And hopefully this just provides some context for many of the issues we're going to be looking at over the next few weeks. So diving right in, this first graph is an illustration of what our general fund revenues and expenditures have been going back to fiscal 2008. There's no special reason for going back to 2008 other than I had the data available right at hand. It's also the first year before that Great Recession. And it also coincides happenstance to my term as budget director. So I'm personally familiar with pretty much what's transpired since then. I did want to point out a few things about this chart, is that while the Great Recession 09 and 10 were significant at the time, they don't look as big looking back from today's, but you can see that this was a significant gap of revenues. There was about an $18 million deficit in those two fiscal years. And what's also striking about that is that it took a full 10 years from that point. You can see all those subsequent years from going from FY10 all the way up to FY19 before we actually broke through and revenues actually produced a surplus. Even though the economy was growing, we weren't seeing excessive growth in our revenues at that point. So we did see the breakthrough starting in FY19. And of course, and this was pre-pandemic. And of course, what happened the very next year, the pandemic hit. So what we did budgetarily is we took the necessary steps as we do to make sure that we don't go deficit. And we actually broke even that year, even though revenues dropped off. We did what we need to do, and we had a break-even budget. And then since that time, over the last 4 years, we've had surpluses. Part of that is due to the fact that growth in revenues as well as inflationary growth contribute to that. And part of that is also due to that we have had issues in terms of expenditures, filling positions and such. So both of those factors have contributed to some surpluses over the last 4 years. And we were just finishing up numbers for FY24. Now, I should mention a caveat about when we on this chart when we look at FY25, and has been discussed and has been sort of the origin of this very committee. As you know, we are potentially losing earnings and payroll tax revenue. We prepared for that in this budget, so we did take a negative adjustment to revenues in that, but we don't know what that total is going to be, and so there is going to be some variation in terms of how this fiscal year plays out on the revenue. And I'm also carrying budget expenditures at budget. So while we've been trending under that, and we could continue to do some of that going forward. You'll note that the surplus we had this past year is shrinking, and so it is beginning to narrow. And I would expect that to continue. And this also, going forward, I do not built in anything with a recession at all. So that's something we also have to keep an eye on in case this just assumes a straightforward revenues growing at about 2% per year and expenditures slightly higher than that with pensions and health insurance and things like that contributing to that rate of growth in that area. So what we're trying to avoid is this gap going forward. And so in terms of getting our revenue to grow such that it doesn't produce that gap. Going to the next slide, I want to just an illustration of basically how our revenues have grown and how it compares to the inflation over that period. FY08, we had revenues, general fund revenue, 435.4 million. And last year it was we came in at 581.5. But if you adjust for the growth in CPI over that time, your purchasing power is just slightly under $400 million. So you can see that our revenue base, while growing, is not keeping up with inflation. And when you look at the details of that, and this will go and highlighted in the next slide, you can see that I tried to divvy up the difference between where our tax revenues are and what they're doing versus some of the other revenues we do. So the tax revenues would be the earnings tax, the payroll tax, the sales tax and such, while the other revenues could be service fees or anything that's a fixed fee and that contribute to our revenues but aren't necessarily adjusted. And you can see what that does to our revenue base. So while you have growth in our tax revenues, you still have somewhere along the lines of 20% of our revenue that is languishing and not growing. And so what that does overall is that even though you might see growth in our revenue of 4% a year or 3% a year, if 20% of it is not growing or is lagging, that's going to drag down your overall growth, and thus our revenues will not keep up. And I think when we start identifying and get into the details of what are the components of our revenue, I think there's something to be looked at in many of these fee revenues and other revenues that don't get adjusted for inflation over time. So how have we dealt with this difference in growth over time versus the increasing cost of inflation over time? Well, we have adapted utilizing some increases in some special fund taxes, which do not go to general revenue, but they provide sources of funds for initiatives that would not be funded under general revenue because we don't have the funds for that, and also supplement general revenue for over and above what we would normally consider general revenue expenditures. So in 2000, obviously, looking through this list, you had the 110-cent Metro Park sales tax. In 2001, we introduced the local use tax, which has gone through a number of iterations, has actually grown and helped offset some of our either decline or lackluster increase in sales taxes. The local use taxes contributed to increases there. The graduated business license tax in 2006 was increased, but that increase was allocated to the Public Safety Trust Fund. By the way, I would, in passing, want to identify the graduated business license tax. That is one of those fees that gets set as a fixed rate, and we adjusted in 2006, which is 18 years ago. It hasn't been adjusted since. So it's one of those things where over time it just goes, the purchasing power produced by that source of revenue goes down. In 2006, we had the 1/8 cent local park sales tax. 2008, we had the 1/2 cent public safety sales tax. As for public safety, mostly police and fire pensions came out of that as well. 2013, we had a 3/16 cent Metro Park sales tax. Now, while a portion of those Metro Park sales tax went to the Metro Parks, we also retained, I believe it was 50% of the 1/10 and 40% of the 3/16 cent for capital improvements to our parks in the city. So that helped alleviate the need for finding additional revenues for those needs. And then, of course, in 2017, we had 2 sales taxes. One was the 1/2 cent economic development sales tax, and then the other was a secondary 1/2 cent public safety sales tax, which also increased as these sales taxes go up. The local use tax also goes up. And so those have all contributed to either to increases in special fund categories that have helped offset some of the items that we could not afford to do through the general revenue. So when you look at the general fund revenue, and I'm using FY23's revenue because at the time when I was doing this, we were still finalizing the FY24. And so I've got this as FY23. And again, this is all on cash basis. You look at this chart and you say, yes, the earnings and payroll taxes by far are the largest source of revenue to general revenue. And we can, as our meetings proceed, we can do a deep dive into any one of these categories, and I have that, and we can look at each one of them. But what's important to note is that, so when you look at this chart, you say, okay, what about these other categories? Are these ripe for potential increases? Well, when you're talking about the general revenue, that may be true, but the city has all these other special fund revenue. So I wanted to go beyond that and wanted to look at what is the city government as a whole, what does that revenue picture look like? So I go to the second slide, and what the second slide indicates, these are all governmental funds. And so this would be general revenue plus all those special funds, including grants and such. And then looking at the city government as a whole, what does the revenue picture look like? And you can see here from this illustration that actually sales and use taxes have in FY23 exceeded, say, earnings and payroll taxes as the largest source to the city government. So I think that's something to keep in mind when we start looking at alternatives in other revenue sources. Now, another thing I'd like to point out is that this isn't done because you look at this and say, well, what about property taxes? It's 103 compared to these other 2 larger sources. Well, actually, and for those who are not familiar with city revenues, the city itself only receives 20% of the property taxes generated in the city. There are other non-city government entities that are allocated a portion of a larger portion of the property tax. And the largest of that would be the public schools. You also have the Zoo Museum District, the library, etc. So if you want to look at not only what city government itself is receiving and what the revenue picture is, but what is generated within the city, both city and non-city entities, what does that revenue picture look like? And so that's what this final slide is illustrating. Basically, I took what our revenues were and the reports by the city collector of revenue and the license collector of what they distribute to the other entities and added that in. And then you can see from looking as a city as a whole, by far the largest source of revenue in the city are the property taxes at $520.3 million in FY23. And then, of course, then you have the sales and use taxes as being the third source, and then earnings and payroll taxes being third source. And you have all these other sources that we can do a deep dive in as we proceed with looking at alternatives, and we can evaluate those as we go forward. This is just a pie chart illustrating what I just basically described in the bar charts. You can see the general revenue, the largest source being the earnings and payroll tax. When you talk about all governmental all for the city, the sales and use taxes is the largest source. And then, but all city government fund revenues and non-city entities, you can see the property taxes is the largest source of revenue. Now, in terms of revenue structure, obviously we want a revenue structure that's maintain a diverse base that grows with the economy at a rate sufficient to maintain city services. And what would that look like? I've got some desirable characteristics. Treasurer Lane, you had mentioned this, and I think we could probably flesh this out a little more, but obviously some of the higher level type traits you'd be looking for is equity and fairness, actually not imposed most heavily on those least able to pay, incurred by users of service, residents, non-residents alike, ability to grow with the economy, reasonableness in relation to impact on economic activity. Obviously, we don't want to propose things that will will be a disincentive for growth, economic growth in the city. And then, of course, there's always ease of enforcement and collection, the ability to actually collect the revenues that we're targeting. And then also, we want to be able to recognize that the city itself, while it has limited population and limited footprint, it is the home of many of the sports and cultural venues and centers that provide much of the quality of life of the region as a whole. That includes all the sports venues, the Busch Stadium, Dome, and such. Arch of the Riverfront, Forest Park, the Zoo, Art Museum, History Museum, Grand Center, and Art Convention Center. So all of those things which contribute to the St. Louis region as a whole are also impacted by whatever we do, and we need to be from a revenue standpoint and be able to capture that revenue that's generated at those facilities. And finally, this is just some addenda background I wanted to include. I pulled from this is straight from our budget document. I include some write-ups on each of the major sources of revenue. So you can find this in our already posted online. I wanted to put this as an addenda to just some background information on major sources of revenue. So I've got the earnings tax, payroll expense tax, sales tax, property taxes, our franchise utility taxes, local use tax, restaurant, and hotel. And this, you can read through that. I'm not going to go through this meeting today, but I just wanted to illustrate that we got some background information on that, and a lot of historical collection information on that we could share as we go forward. A couple of things I did want to point out. Again, when we talk about taxes and revenues in the city, we want to be also aware that, for instance, when I mentioned over other entities, for instance, on the hotel tax, this references our 3.5% tax that's levied that the city receives. But we also need to be aware that there's a 3.75% gross receipts tax that is also imposed by the city and county, which goes to the Regional Arts Commission and the CVC for funding prevention-related activities. So when we talk about each one of these sources, there may be some that do not come to the city proper, but go to other entities. So we need to be aware of that. And that's all I had today. So again, I'm sure we can do a lot of deep diving in any of these revenue sources. I've got a lot of history that we can discuss, and I'll just leave it at that for our first meeting.
Well, thank you very much, Director Payne. That was extremely insightful. I'm going to open it up to members of the council to see if they have any questions or if anybody would like to request a deeper dive on any of these topics.
A couple of quick questions, Casey and Paul. Thanks for that presentation. And you may have talked about this in your presentation. I may have missed it, but I saw that there was on one of the earlier slides, there was growth in revenue in 2021 to 2023. Was any of that associated? Did I see that wrong? Was any of that associated with possible ESSER funds and things of that nature?
I'm sorry, is this the correct slide you're referring to?
Yes.
Okay, and
Yep.
your question was whether,
In general fund revenues, I see that there was a slight increase or a big increase in revenue that was coming in. Looks like from fiscal year 2021 to 2023, looks like. Was that
Yes.
associated with ESSER funds or any other?
oh,
thing
I
that-
see.
like-
No, these were, if the questions, these are just general revenues. We did not pull anything from ARPA or anything. There was no, when we went through this whole process, budgeting over the last few years, and as you know, ARPA has been allocated to special initiatives. Initially, we thought we were going to use that to bridge the budget gap, but that did not get pulled into any of these numbers. So this is just general revenue.
Okay. And
Great,
then,
and then, oh,
and
sorry,
then
go
the-
ahead.
one other question. There was another slide. I think it was the next slide after this. If you could. Sorry, one more slide, perhaps. The other revenue. I know that's only represents, looks like about 20% of the entire revenue source. What are those sources of the other revenue? What's in that number?
Yeah, you have a lot of departmental fee revenue, building division permit fees. You've got, like I mentioned on one of the slides, graduated business license tax. It's a fixed
Okay.
fee. You've got all the departmental fees that are charged for services. We'd like to, you'd like to be able to adjust those over time to account for costs, but it doesn't always do that. Anything that's a fixed fee amount that doesn't necessarily grow each year, you'd have to have more volume as opposed to the rate itself. And so I think, and again, it's funny because I did have the illustration with with the more detail on it, but it was too busy for the page, so you wouldn't be able to read it. But I do have all that, so we can definitely get into that by minutia, if you like, by each line item. But that's what but we've seen that, and I think it is going to be something to look at because it is, as I mentioned, a drag on the overall growth.
Mm-hmm. And just one more comment. I was quite surprised at the slide that you put forth that showed that the property tax was actually third in terms of revenue coming into the city. So they just kind of piqued my interest, I'll just say. I thought that would have been I think it was back probably one page, going off memory.
Which one were you referring to?
Yeah, the previous, the one where I think property tax was number 3 in terms of the revenue coming into the city. I think it was.
Oh yeah, you're talking. Yeah, that's this one right here.
No, the other one.
Oh, to the city. Oh, you mean into the city proper?
Yeah, exactly right.
Right. Yeah, it's often people are surprised when because property taxes, if your citizens look at that and say that's probably the largest tax they pay in the city is the property tax, and it's not necessarily well understood that the city itself only gets about 20% of that.
Right.
So and so that's what this is illustrating.
Okay, yeah. It just kind of shocked me.
Yeah.
And are you emailing this presentation to this working group, or is this something that we have access to just to?
I'll post it and I'll send it to Casey as a PDF. So you can post it as well.
Okay, great, thanks. That was it for me.
Great, thanks so much. And then Danielle, I believe that you were next up.
Awesome. Thank you, Director Payne. I'm curious for this group, are there any, particularly on the tax side, any revenue streams that are capped either by their rate, by ordinance, by statute from the state where the city is already at or close to the cap on what you can impose on those particular taxes? Sometimes you see it around sales, sometimes it's on, other pieces, but I'm curious on if we're already at the bandwidth or the city is already at the full threshold of certain revenue streams.
Yes, particularly on the property tax, there's a certain limit on that for particular purposes, and that's adjusted each year. Only with we're only allowed to capture inflation and such, and new construction. But other than that, you're capped there. The sales tax rate, there may be some out there, capacity out there, but that is you need to reference state statutes. We can do that, showing which ones are still available to do that. We haven't done that recently simply because sales tax is one of those where we have gone up pretty high on that in recent years. I'm trying to think others. Obviously, the earnings tax, we've got that limit there. Now, when it comes to service fee revenue, as you know, under the Hancock provision of the Missouri State Constitution, you are allowed to charge for up to the cost of that service. So obviously you can't charge more than what the service costs. But I don't believe at this moment, the biggest one that I think about would be like refuse, where we do have a refuse fee. It's not coming close to covering the cost of the refuse service. So those are the type of things, but you're right. We need to keep an eye on those. So both in identifying what our capacity is under individual ones, as well as when it comes to service fee revenue, you can't exceed that which is allowed under Hancock.
Thank you.
Great. Ryan, I think you were next and we'll go to Linda.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I sort of just wanted to, well, now I guess I'll add to what Paul said about the limits on property tax. I mean, it's really to say we're up against the ceiling is, yeah, I mean, it's last I checked, I think maybe 6 months ago or so, we were within only 2 cents of per $100 of assessed value. So there's not much there. And on sales tax, I think most of us understand that a sales tax, well, they've already gotten pretty high in the city. Sales taxes tend to inherently be regressive. So I don't want to disqualify sort of any ideas right out of the gate, but I'm not sure how you raise sales taxes not disproportionately affecting lower income households. And I think I had another point, but yeah, I'll just stop at that. Thank you.
Great, thanks for that. And then Linda, we'll go to you.
So I have a two-part question because I noticed that you mentioned like during the 2020, 2021 that there was a lot of savings because there was a lot of open positions. I'm curious to like at this moment, like what are the open positions that are still left? And then also there was a slide that you mentioned in terms of future funds and how the ease of enforcement, right? And I know, like, for example, like the assessor's office has been really good at getting like things online. I'm just curious as to like, you know, in terms of citations and fees, are there things out there that are still pending and not collected from the city that we need to work on, like the ease of enforcement, right? Or just collecting of those fees outside the property tax. You know, I'm just thinking about, you know, building citations, things like that. Is that under consideration at this time?
I think on the top of my head, that would be significant enough to move the needle in terms of enforcement. I know that the collector of revenue has their various options enforcing collections on property tax, obviously, which they enforce. And then we've got different abilities to collect, for instance, weed bills and things like that on derelict buildings and such. I'm not aware of that being, well, obviously that's things you want to pursue. I'm not aware of that being anything of a significant amount that you would be able to drive it. But absolutely, you'd want to be able to ensure that your enforcement, as a matter of fact, that's one of the considerations when we talk, as I highlighted, your ability to enforce and administer and collect what we're actually talking about is an important consideration. So that's a good point.
Nancy, I know you had your hand up, I think, to share some insight. So go ahead.
Right. So in following up, I think some of it depends on what we view as the term significant, because what the average resident would think is significant isn't going to help us with the huge changes in our revenue. However, we are collecting, as Paul has mentioned, for a lot of things that had not necessarily been collected on vacant buildings, vacant lots, anything the city does, that there's an ordinance that allows us to charge the owner. We are going back and going through and taking them to court. Illegal dumpers are being prosecuted wherever we can. Doesn't bring in huge revenue, but it does help in the long run. The other piece is to answer your other question, Linda. We're going through a process still. It's a process, but we have slowly but surely starting to move everything to be done online so that the permits and things will be done in a more accurate, quicker way than they have in the past. And I think that'll help us be able to track as it gets to, as it goes into, into implementation, that will help us in the long run with a lot of things. But we are collecting, we collect a lot of money at the tow lot. That doesn't mean that goes into the general revenue, but a lot of money might be $100,000, $200,000, which I think is a lot of money. But Paul's like, that doesn't help me the way I need it to help. So I think it's worth us still talking about, but we have been making a concerted effort with the comptroller's office and the treasurer's office where it makes sense to figure out all those pieces going forward since we've came in, so.
Okay. Sam, I think you were next up in terms of having hand up.
Yeah, Paul, thank you very much for this presentation. It was super helpful. Where you mentioned that where you showed the surplus from 20 through 23, there were a number of vacant headcount that contributed to that surplus. As you look forward with the forecast there, how did you account for service levels? Did you assume that those vacancies remain, or does your forecast take into account that some of those positions would be filled again eventually? Kind of how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, I as I mentioned, it's something to highlight, but I have not made an assumption on that. But basically what I've done is progressed out from this year's budget going forward and what the trend would be, knowing, and basically we do this each year. We do a 5-year projection on just a sort of an outlook, and knowing what the inflation rate might be, and knowing what trends in pension costs and health insurance costs are, incorporating that all in, apply that to our budget number and project that forward. Same thing with the revenues. We know what the general trend has been historically. We try to apply those long-term trends on the revenue side and then apply that going forward. And typically it produces a gap, which is unsurprisingly, because as I mentioned in the subsequent graph, you can see that we don't typically keep up with inflation.
Yep.
Now, yes, I think there's a possibility that if you don't expend your total budget, you can still have you underspend your budget, and you can still have a surplus going forward, or maybe reduce the potential of a deficit going forward. That is possible. I think the trend may be, given that we're starting to reduce that, is that you're going to start, and we saw it this year, where that amount of underspend, the amount of over revenue started to narrow. And I think that is probably likely to continue. Now, will it be gone by next year? I don't know, but I think it's something that you have to prepare for, and so, but it is something to consider. Now, also, I also point out, and I think I mentioned this when I did the projections, is that this is going forward on a status quo. It does not anticipate, and often we can do this, is throw in what happens when we get another recession, which may hit at one point or another. What does that do to our revenues, and how do we grow back from there? And that's the kind of thing that we can always model out. But this doesn't, for the sake of simplicity, I haven't done that here.
Thank you.
All right, Danielle, I think you have your hand up again. Yeah.
I do, thank you. Does the city receive any pilots or payments in lieu of taxes, either from the university or from any other major nonprofit entities in the city? Or have any sort of revenue sharing agreements for things like basic services like public safety and public services?
We have not. So I'm aware of that taking place in other cities. Where, as you know, we are many of our major employers are universities and the hospitals and things like that. And they are exempt both from the payroll tax as well as many of the property taxes. And so that's part of it. Now, whether they assist in other ways on the expenditure side where they provide different services for such, they can identify that. But on the revenue side, there are some major institutions that are exempt from some of our larger taxes.
Thank you.
Nancy, go ahead.
I was just going to clarify, but Danielle, you're really only asking about if they contribute to the revenue, not how else they contribute to the city.
That's correct.
Okay, so I'll hold my other comment then.
All right, Ryan, I think you have your hand up.
You're on
You're on mute,
Ryan.
Ryan.
Okay, so before I say this, I want to start with that we have some really great nonprofits, some large nonprofits in our community that are doing really good work and benefit the community in a number of ways. But I want to point out that in addition to the property taxes, Missouri is fairly unique in that all nonprofits are exempt from all sales taxes. I think that, I think if it's an exemption for all nonprofits of all sales taxes, there are less than a half dozen states that do it like that. So not sure what, I just wanted to make that point, I guess, for informational purposes. So even as we see the increase in sales taxes, the purchases of the large nonprofits are not part of that.
All right, are there any other questions or comments for Paul? All right, well, seeing them. Thank you so much, Paul, for that great presentation. I think that gives a nice base level understanding of where we're at as a city and where we've been recently. Of course, Paul, as Paul offered, if there's any requests to dig a little bit more into information that this group thinks could be helpful, go ahead and send that to me and I'll facilitate that getting over to Paul. And we'll make that information available to the whole group, of course. Having said that, the next item of business is going to be adjournment. So is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right, is there a second?
Second.
Great, okay. All right, well, the meeting's adjourned. Thank you all very much for your time this morning. I know we went a little bit over a posted time, and keep an eye out for scheduling emails for the next one.
Thank you all.
All right,
Thank you,
thanks.
Casey. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.